this is Christmas week, and I usually talk about the women in Jesus's lineage and how each one of them fulfilled a piece of prophecy given about Jesus. So here's that video. I'm going to link it here from last year if you would like to look at those women, which are Tamar, Bathsheba, Rahab, Ruth, and Mary. So in this video today, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about another biblical woman who has another special honor. She is actually what we call a type and shadow of Jesus found in the Old Testament. Now, while there are prophecies in the Old Testament to show that Jesus is who he said, there are also these types and shadows that show us the parallels of who Jesus is as well. For the most part, we will only see men fulfilling these roles in the Old Testament, men that you may have heard of, people like Joseph and Job and Jonah and Solomon. You know, a type and a shadow is a way for Jesus or Christ to be revealed to us in the Old Testament. They provide a way for us to really see the idea of something, but they don't completely reveal it. So I'm really excited today to talk about this. We're going to be looking at Abigail. We're going to be looking at her story from 1 Samuel chapter 25. And we're going to explore how she, a woman, is a type and shadow of Christ. Someone that we can look to for inspiration. Join me. Hello there, wise woman. This is DeneenTB, your Christian business growth strategist and clarity coach. And I'm so happy that you've joined me. And I really look forward to digging into this story of Abigail with you. So make sure to subscribe if you are liking the content here. Thanks so much. Okay, let's begin with this. I want to be really clear what a type and shadow is from the Old Testament. I have come to realize that many people, many Christians, Christian businesswomen included, that's who I talk to, do not realize that the Bible is God's story about Jesus. It's like the Gospels are an actual hinge that connect the Old Testament to the New Testament. Everything in the Old Testament points toward the Gospels, to Jesus, while everything in the New Testament points back to the Gospels, to Jesus. When you really have this perspective and you look through the Word of God with this lens, it is amazing what you can find and what you really discover. I also know that Jesus himself talked about these types and shadows. For example, in Matthew 12:40, Jesus compares himself to Jonah. And he says this, "For just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth." Also in John 3:14, Jesus compares himself to the bronze serpent. And this is what he says. It says, "As Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up." This is amazing if we know that the bronze serpent was what they had to look at in order for the curse to be lifted. Jesus also lifts a curse, right? Again, in John 6:32-33, Jesus compares himself to manna. And he says this, "Moses did not give you the bread from heaven, but my Father gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world." I could go on and on. I just wanted to give you a sense of what we'll be talking about. So let me know down in the comments, is this something new for you? Is this something that maybe you haven't thought of before? You haven't looked at scripture in this way? Let me know, and let me know what you're thinking. As we go through the story today, I am going to point out 12 ways that Abigail is a type and shadow of Jesus, and it's so exciting. But I do want to give credit where credit is due. The commentary that I'm going to be using, and I'm going to be using his article, is by Scott LaPierre. It's the article I will link below in the description, and I'm going to be probably reading a lot of it, especially the scripture parts. I want to let you know that right away. So if you see me looking down, it's because I'm using those notes. We're going to be going through 1 Samuel chapter 25. If you want to follow along, I will be reading from the ESV, the English Standard Version, and we'll stop along the way as we're reading to point out these 12 ways that Abigail is a type and shadow of Jesus. Ready? All right, let's go. Okay, let's get started. We'll start reading at verse 1 in chapter 25. Now Samuel died, and all Israel assembled and mourned for him. They buried him in the house at Ramah. Then David rose and went down to the wilderness of Paran, and there a man named Moan, whose business was in Carmel. He was a rich man. He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. He was shearing the sheep in Carmel. Now the name of the man was Nabal, and the name of his wife Abigail. The woman was discerning and beautiful, but the man was harsh and badly behaved. He was a Calebite. Okay, so David and his men are actually on the run from Saul at this point. And what would he do, and what was common in that day, was for men and groups of men, and David, of course, had groups of men with him, to go and offer protection for people's land and for their animals and defend their towns and different things like that so that they could make a living. So let's continue on in verse 4. David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing his sheep. So David sent 10 young men. And David said to the young men, go up to Carmel and go to Nabal and greet him in my name. And thus you shall greet him. Say this, peace be to you and peace to your house and peace to all that you have. I hear that you have shearers. Now your shepherds have been with us, and we did them no harm, and they missed nothing all the time that they were in Carmel. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. Therefore let young men find favor in your eyes, for we come on a feast day. Please give whatever you have at hand to your servants and to your son David. So when David's young men came, they said all this to Nabal in the name of David, and they waited. Okay, so because it was this common practice to have to pay these men that actually were guarding their properties, Nabal shouldn't have been surprised that David sent these men. He should have actually expected it to happen. So what does Nabal say? In verse 10, we see Nabal answered David's servants. Who is David? Who is this son of Jesse? There are many servants these days who are breaking away from their masters. So what happened? Well, Nabal really responds with 2 insults, because everyone knows who David is, because he's been living with the Philistines, because he escaped Saul a long time ago. In fact, in 1 Samuel 29, verse 5, it says, Saul has struck down thousands and David has struck down tens of thousands. So the Philistines had heard about David's exploits. So had Nabal. And he was acting like David was like nobody. Like why should I pay attention to this guy and what he's doing? Maybe he ran away from his master, right? So the second insult is referring to the fact that he was rebellious. He's saying he probably ran away from his master and he's being rebellious. And why should I pay attention to this David? So in verse 11, he says, shall I take my bread and my water and my meat and that I have killed for my shearers and give it to the men who come from I don't know where? Now, you know what? An honorable person, a person of integrity, really would have been glad that David and his men had been protecting their shepherds, had protecting their sheep, all of these things that were income producing for them. But Nabal's response was really a way for him to reveal his selfishness, that he didn't want to pay a wage or earn the earnings of someone, right? But we continue in verses 12 and 13. It says, so David's young men turned away and came back and told him all of this. And David said to his men, every man strap on his sword. David got mad. And every man of them strapped on the sword. David also strapped on his sword, and about 400 men went up after David, while 200 remained with the baggage. So David has a lot of guys with him, right? He has a lot of people with him. And David gets super mad. This is really a low point for David, because we know that David has all of these emotions. If we know anything about the story of David, and he gives into his flesh more than once, right? And so this was something that he was going to do. He was going to go and kill Nabal. And he was going to take over everything. Okay, so here's where we're going to start to see what happens with Abigail. Let's start at verse 14. But one of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, "Behold, David sent messengers out of the wilderness to greet our master, and he railed at them. Yet the men were very good to us, and we suffered no harm. And we did not miss anything when we were in the fields, as long as we went with them. They were a wall to us, both at night and by day, all the while we were keeping the sheep." So you see how they have really acted honorably. David's servants, David's people protected Nabal's assets, all of the things that could make him profit, his animals, right? Nabal's servants actually knew him pretty well and knew that there was really no reasoning with him. So they went to his wife, Abigail. Maybe they thought that she could have some pull. Let's find out. We're in verse 17. "Now therefore know this and consider what you should do. For harm is determined against our master and against all his house. And he is such a worthless man that one cannot speak to him." So they're telling this to Abigail. And they know what their master is like. And it's kind of like scary. "Then Abigail made haste and took 200 loaves and 2 skins of wine and 5 sheep already prepared and 5 seahs of parched grain and 100 clusters of raisins and 200 cakes of figs and laid them on donkeys. And she said to her young men, 'Go on before me. Behold, I come after you.' But she did not tell her husband Nabal." Okay, we're getting into the type and shadow of what Abigail does from this point on, of how she is a type and shadow of Jesus. First thing, she's riding on a donkey. She's riding on a donkey to make atonement for what her husband has done, to make atonement so that she can ride there to meet David and his men as they are coming. And that's what it says in verse 20. "As she rode on the donkey and came down under the cover of the mountain, behold, David and his men came down toward her, and she met them." So she rode the donkey to make atonement for Nabal's sin, just as Jesus rode his donkey into Jerusalem because he needed to atone for our sin. And we know that this is told to us in John 12, and that it is quoting Zechariah 9. So it's also something that's in the Old Testament that is a prophecy. So I love that. The second thing that we see so far in the story is that Abigail sought to bear Nabal's iniquity, his sin. So in verse 21, it says, "Now David had said, 'Surely in vain have I guarded all that this fellow has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that belonged to him, and he has returned me evil for good. God do so to the enemies of David, and more also, if by morning I leave so much as one male of all who belong to him.' Then Abigail saw David. She hurried and got down from the donkey, and she fell before David on her face and bowed to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, 'On me alone, O Lord, be the guilt. Please let your servant speak in your ears and hear the words of your servant.'" Okay, this is exactly what Jesus did, right? Abigail reveals this substitutionary guilt, especially in the words that she says when she says, "On me alone be the guilt." She was willing to take on Nabal's sin, his iniquity. Similarly, that's what Jesus did when he bore our iniquities, our sin, when he was on the cross. That's what Isaiah 53 tells us. Okay, there's a third one right now coming up. It's that Abigail saved a foolish man. So in verse 25, it says, "Let not my Lord regard this worthless fellow Nabal, for his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, your servant, did not see the young men of my Lord whom you sent. So Nabal's name actually means fool. This disobedience made him even more foolish, like our disobedience to God makes us foolish. Jeremiah 4 says, "For my people are foolish. They have not known me." So just as Abigail saved or was trying to save this foolish man who didn't know God, Jesus too saves us as foolish people who don't know God. 1 Corinthians chapter 1 says, "But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise." Okay, the fourth way that Abigail is a type and shadow of Jesus is that she provided an offering for Nabal's sin. So in verse 26, we start, "Now then, my Lord, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, because the Lord has restrained you from the blood guilt and from saving with your own hand, now then let your enemies and those who seek to do evil to my Lord be as Nabal. And now let this present that your servant has brought to my Lord be given to the young men who follow my Lord. Please forgive the trespass of your servant." So Abigail is providing this offering for Nabal's sin so that he could be forgiven, just like Jesus provided an offering of himself on our behalf so that we could be forgiven. Ephesians 5 says, "And walk in love as Christ also has loved us and given himself for us, an offering and a sacrifice to God for a sweet smelling aroma." I love what Abigail's words and how they are used to show us just how we can be forgiven because of Christ, be forgiven to have that relationship with God. And her words are helping Nabal be forgiven by David. I love it. I just love it. So we're on to example number 5. And it's that Abigail declared the king's house the innocence and the victory over enemies. Now, I don't want to go too much into all of these different things and the different layers because this video is going to be long enough as it is. But I just want to note here that Abigail spoke about David's future in a way that she could have used the same words to actually describe Christ. Because she says this at the end of verse 28. "For the Lord will certainly make my Lord a sure house, because my Lord is fighting the battles of the Lord. And evil shall not be found in you so long as you live. If men rise up and to pursue you and to seek your life, the life of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of the living in the care of the Lord your God. And the lives of your enemies shall sling out as from the hollow of a sling. And when the Lord has done to my Lord according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, and has appointed you prince over Israel, my Lord shall have no cause of grief or pangs of conscience for having shed blood without cause, for my Lord's working salvation himself. And when the Lord has dealt with my Lord, then remember your servant." Oh, I love this. We can look at these parallels of what she's talking about. She says of David's house. And of course, in Hebrews 3, it says Jesus is counted worthy of glory as the builder of God's house. And she spoke of David's innocence. And in John 19, Pilate also speaks of Jesus' innocence. She speaks of David's victories over his enemies. And then 1 Corinthians 15, Paul says that Jesus must reign until he has put all his enemies under his feet. I love this. I love this. This is amazing. We are almost halfway through these 12 ways that Abigail is a type and shadow of Jesus. Number 6 is that Abigail was accepted as an intercessor. And in verse 32, we read, "And David said to Abigail, 'Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you this day to meet me.'" So David accepted what Abigail said as an intercessor, just as Jesus is an intercessor between God and man. The Father accepts the Son, who serves as an intercessor for us. And so she is accepted by David as an intercessor. Then example number 7 for Abigail is that she turned away wrath. Remember, David was coming to kill Nabal. And it probably wasn't going to be pretty. He was probably going to kill a lot of other people too. And he would have had that on his hands. He would have had that murder on his conscience. He would have been guilty of it. In verse 33, we continue. It says, "Blessed be your discretion, and blessed be you who have kept me this day from blood guilt and from working salvation with my own hand. For as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, who has restrained me from hurting you, unless you had hurried and come to meet me, truly by morning there had not been left to Nabal so much as one male." Wow. He was really mad, right? So she turned away the wrath against Nabal. And that's what Jesus does for us, turning the wrath of God away from us. And we just love that. 1 Thessalonians 5 says, "For God did not appoint us to wrath, but to obtain salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ." All right. The 8th way is that Abigail established peace. We're at verse 35, the first part. It says, "Then David received from her hand which she had brought him. And he said to her, 'Go up in peace to your house.'" So without Abigail, Nabal would have had to face the judgment that David had already put on him. And so Abigail actually established the peace between Nabal and between David, just as Jesus established peace between us and God. I just think this is just a beautiful, beautiful picture of what Jesus does for us. All right, the 9th way that Abigail is a type and shadow is that Abigail had a pleasing character. Remember it said that she was beautiful and gracious at the beginning? Okay, if you forgot, you can go back and look at that. So the end of verse 35 said, "See, I have obeyed your voice and I have granted your petition." And I love what the New King James Version says. David says it this way. He says, "See, I have heeded your voice and respected your person." And I love that because God really respects and is pleased with Jesus. And we see that when he is baptized in Matthew, and it says, "This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased." So we know that David had appreciation for her, had respect for her, and same as God has respect for Jesus. The 10th way is that her actions actually defeated the devil. Let's start at verse 36 here. "And Abigail came to Nabal, and behold, he was holding a feast in his house, like the feast of a king. And Nabal's heart was merry within him, for he was very drunk. So she told him nothing at all until the morning light. And in the morning, when the wine had gone out of Nabal, his wife told him these things, and his heart died within him, and he became a stone. And about 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died." Ooh. So in this, Nabal is a picture of the devil. If you go back to verse 25, that Hebrew word for the worthless fellow is the word Belial, which is how they translate it in the King James Version. And the name is also the same name for the devil in the New Testament. So if we looked at 2 Corinthians, it says, "And what accord has Christ with Belial? Or what part has a believer with an unbeliever?" So Nabal died after Abigail interceded. Similarly, what's going to happen is that Jesus' intercession on the cross for us defeated the devil, defeated Satan, right? That's what he did, because we are now no longer slaves to sin, slaves to that nature that we have, and we are free now to be slaves to God. The 11th way that Abigail is a type and shadow is that she washed the servants' feet. So we're Continuing in verse 39 here, it says, when David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, blessed be the Lord who has avenged the insult I received at the hand of Nabal and has kept back his servant from wrongdoing. The Lord has returned the evil of Nabal on his own head. Then David sent and spoke to Abigail to take her as his wife. When the servants of David came to Abigail at Carmel, they said to her, David has sent us to you to take you to him as his wife. And she rose and bowed with her face to the ground and said, behold, your handmaiden is a servant to wash the feet of the servants of my Lord. She washed those servants' feet as a sign of humility. Jesus washed his own disciples' feet as a sign of humility. We see that in John 13. Okay, the very last thing we're going to talk about is number 12, the 12th way that Abigail is a type and shadow of Jesus. She was actually elevated to a position of honor. In verse 42 we read, and Abigail hurried and rose and mounted a donkey, and her 5 young women attended her. She followed the messengers of David and became his wife. So after Abigail finished all of her work, she became David's wife. She sat next to him in a place of honor because he was going to be and will be and was the king. She sat next to him just as Jesus sits at the right hand of the Father. I think this is a beautiful, beautiful response as we look at the parallels that come from the Old Testament to show us exactly God's story about Jesus. I know for me, this has been a full and exciting video to make. I love bringing out the women in the Bible to show you that God really does have a special place for women in his story. He has a special place for you too. He has you living at this time in history to really make an impact on your sphere of influence. And as a Christian businesswoman, you even have a bigger calling to be in the marketplace. Your responsibility is to really show God's goodness, to be the salt and light to those that you come in contact with every single day, to be his ambassador, his feet on the ground, so to speak, telling others about him. If you're feeling conflicted about how you can be used of God through your business, then we need to chat. We need to have a conversation. Let's set up a clarity call today. I will put the link down in the description so that you can make your appointment. I would love to talk to you more about this subject or about how you want to show up as that ambassador for Christ in the marketplace, telling others about him. This is DeneenTB. Thank you so much for sharing with me this story of Abigail. Make sure to comment below on anything that you learned, anything you want to tell me. Make sure to like this video and of course subscribe to the channel. Have a great rest of your day. And as always, be filled to overflowing.